And, what stands out immediately is that the piece possesses a raw, passionate perspective and a very clear point of view regarding the real-world dangers of extreme online personalities.
The abrupt transition from analyzing violent extremist rhetoric to an enthusiastic sponsor read severely undermines the emotional weight of the preceding commentary.
Yeah, the weakness here is this profound tonal whiplash right in the middle of the text. I mean, it moves directly from quoting Dan Bilzerian's deeply disturbing violent threats about global conflicts and exterminating a nation straight into a breezy, luxurious discussion about Van Man's eye cream and the holistic benefits of emu oil.
Right, because there is no buffer here whatsoever. The gravity of the political commentary is accidentally trivialized. The listener is still processing an intense discussion about the radicalization of youth, and suddenly, without taking a breath, they're being pitched a potion lotion for eyelash growth.
I can see what they're going for, but the script literally goes from saying there are people that actually follow these clowns, young impressionable men 100% that don't have good dads, straight into,
it's so good that we have a really good new eye cream now, you guys.
Exactly. The sheer proximity of those two thoughts creates immense friction. It's jarring for the listener because it asks them to instantly switch from a posture of deep, critical concern about a societal crisis to a posture of relaxed consumerism. It risks making the hosts sound disconnected from the severity of their own prior points.
So the suggestion for improvement here is to create a distinct formal buffer or transitional segment that intentionally closes the door on the heavy political commentary before opening the door to the advertisement.
You just have to give the audience a psychological breath. You need to signal that the intense, analytical portion of the discussion has formally concluded and that the show is briefly pivoting to the business side of the production.
That makes sense, but a lot of concrete ways to implement this, because there are a few avenues the creator could take. My initial thought is physically moving the ad altogether. If the goal is to protect the integrity of the commentary, why not just place the sponsor read at the very beginning of the segment as a pre-roll or save it for the absolute end of the broadcast?
That makes sense, but a lot of sponsors pay a premium for a mid-roll ad because audience retention is highest in the middle of the show. So if they simply cannot move the ad to the beginning or the end, then inserting a highly conclusive verbal sign-off becomes entirely non-negotiable.
That's a very fair point about the business side of audio. So if the ad absolutely must stay in the middle, right after the heaviest content, we need a structural bridge. For example, right after the line about young impressionable men, you could add something explicitly conclusive.
Like saying, we'll continue to monitor how these influencers impact young audiences, and we are going to keep tracking this dangerous rhetoric as it evolves.
But for now, we're going to take a very quick break to thank the sponsors who make this show possible.
That one sentence completely changes the architecture of the segment. It respects the listener, and you can bolster that even further with audio cues, like mandating a deliberate 3-second pause in the audio after that verbal sign-off to create a hard downdraft.
You take a breath, you change your vocal register to be a bit lighter, and then you introduce the eye cream. It fundamentally solves the tonal whiplash while satisfying the sponsor.
The rapid introduction of severe disparate allegations without deeper exploration prevents the audience from fully grasping the broader impact of the highlighted influencer.
Yeah, that's our next major point. The core weakness in this section is that it reads much more like a breathless list of grievances rather than a focused, systematic analysis.
Right, the narrative jumps frantically from one highly complex, massive controversy to another in mere sentences. We go from Owens digging into someone's childhood, immediately over to Romanian human trafficking, straight into a massive geopolitical claim regarding 9/11, and then suddenly pivot to a completely different influencer's violent rant.
It's a lot. The listener is left without a clear understanding of how all these extreme behaviors actually connect to one another. It feels like throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks, rather than meticulously building a persuasive case.
The creator is clearly seeing a pattern in the alt-right space. They mention Sneeko, Fuentes, Tate, and Bilzerian almost in one breath because they all represent the same ecosystem, but the dots aren't quite being connected for the audience.
So the suggestion for improvement here is to anchor these disparate points to a central, clearly stated thesis about the alt-right influencer ecosystem.
Exactly. By establishing a core argument early on, the piece can afford to explore fewer examples, but with significantly more depth and analytical rigor. You do not need to list every single bad thing these people have done this week to prove they are dangerous.
You just need to pick the strongest 2 examples and dissect them thoroughly to prove your overarching point.
Let's provide some concrete examples of how to execute that shift from a breathless list of grievances to a thesis-driven analysis. Take the mention of the 9/11. Right now it's treated as a passing side note, where the host just says, "She just keeps on surprising me with her weirdness," and then they immediately move to the next topic.
Instead of that, use that specific incident to explicitly illustrate a thesis. You could establish a thesis right at the top of the show, something like controversial figures inevitably have to escalate their rhetoric to increasingly absurd extremes just to maintain their algorithmic engagement.
By using that thesis, you stop treating the 9/11 tweet as a throwaway comment about weirdness. Instead, it becomes your primary piece of empirical evidence proving that escalation model. You spend 3 minutes unpacking why someone feels financially or socially compelled to touch a third-rail historical event.
And to create the space to do that deep dive, another concrete step is to aggressively trim the fat. Cut one of the minor tangents entirely, like that brief passing mention of Sneako's name right before the Bilzerian clip.
Yes, if you aren't going to take the time to explain who Sneako is or why his audience matters, that name drop adds 0 analytical value. Cut that tangent entirely and use that reclaimed real estate to explain the core hypocrisy in the Candace Owens segment.
Spend more time explaining exactly why her defense of her own 10-year-old clip directly and logically contradicts her current methodology of unraveling someone else's childhood. Break down the cognitive dissonance required to justify tearing apart someone's kindergarten experiences while claiming your own past is off limits.
Relying on casual dismissals and informal name-calling to counter severe extremist rhetoric misses a critical opportunity to dismantle the underlying danger of these figures.
That is such an important pivot, because the weakness here is a stark mismatch in tone. The material is explicitly trying to highlight a very real, very dark societal threat, the radicalization of young, impressionable men. Yet the hosts are countering that severe structural threat with casual mockery.
Calling someone who is actively advocating for genocide on a microphone gross, or labeling someone with millions of devoted, easily influenced followers a clown, accidentally minimizes the threat. It reduces a structural societal danger to the level of petty internet drama.
The hosts clearly recognize the target demographic being exploited. They specifically mention reading those comments from young men saying, "Sign me up, I'll go with you," in response to the violent rhetoric. They see the danger staring them in the face.
But the language they use to fight back shrinks the villain. If the subject matter is grave, the counterargument must possess a matching gravity. You want to make the antagonist in your commentary appear as formidable as the real-world threat they pose, so that your teardown is actually meaningful.
Which brings us to the suggestion for improvement. Elevate the counterargument by replacing informal mockery with a structured, articulate breakdown of exactly why their influence is dangerous. The tone needs to match the grim reality of the subject matter.
You do not defeat extremist propaganda by calling it stupid. You defeat it by dismantling its mechanics, exposing its rhetorical tricks, and explaining exactly how it preys on the vulnerable. Let's look at concrete examples of how to rewrite.
Instead of simply looking at a comment section and saying, "There's people that actually follow these clowns," you articulate the specific psychological mechanism of radicalization. You could rewrite that reaction to say, when figures with millions of followers normalize this kind of violent rhetoric, it creates a dangerous permission structure for young men lacking guidance to adopt these extreme views.
That sounds incredibly authoritative. It shows the listener that you aren't just reacting, you are diagnosing a problem. And looking at the reaction to the Bilzerian clip specifically, instead of saying, "This is so beyond gross," replace that with a specific condemnation of the ideology.
You could say, what we are listening to right now is the active romanticization of violence, packaged as patriotism, and sold to an audience that doesn't have the life experience to know any better.
By swapping out the casual name-calling for articulate structural teardowns, you elevate the entire commentary. You go from sounding like two people gossiping about a bad tweet to astute cultural critics analyzing a legitimate societal crisis.
It commands the room. So looking holistically at everything we've unpacked today, we started by looking at the structure and flow, specifically emphasizing the absolute necessity of buffering ad transitions to protect the emotional weight of heavy political commentary.
Then we moved into completeness and focus, highlighting the need to anchor rapid-fire claims to a central thesis, moving away from a breathless list of grievances toward a deeper analysis of fewer points.
And finally, we looked at tone and style, ensuring the rhetoric used to counter extremism is as serious as the threat itself.
To give you a quick summary of the concrete actionable steps, first, insert clear, conclusive, transitional sign-offs before the eye cream act. Second, cut minor tangents like sneako to expand on the psychology behind the hypocrisy.
And third, swap out casual name-calling for articulate structural teardowns of extremist rhetoric.
The foundation here is incredibly strong. We absolutely love the passion and the raw perspective you brought to this material, and these structural tweaks will help that message resonate with so much more authority.
We highly encourage you to implement these revisions, take the piece to the next level, and submit your updated work back in for a future critique.